publicly available. نيجي الآن لأمريكان ميديكال أسوسيشن Principle of Medical Ethics في الريسيرش، تقريبا مشابهة إلها لكن نمر عليها بشكل سريع. Physician involvement in research. نتكلم الآن عن إنه لما الطبيب يمشي أو يشتغل في الريسيرش. Biomedical and health research is intended to contribute to the advancement of knowledge, a society of future patients rather than the to specific benefits of the researcher himself or herself. However, research involving human participants should be conducted in a manner minimize risk, avoid necessary suffering, depends on the willingness of participants to accept risks. They must be able to make informed decisions. As I said, many of this will be a little bit similar to the Helsinki Declaration. Physicians, actually it is based on that. Physician researchers share their responsibility for the ethical conduct of research with the institution that carries out research. Obligation, the institution to oversee the design, conduct, dissemination of research. The IRB also, as well as the individual research, should ensure that each participant has been appropriately informed. To fulfill these obligations, individual physicians who are involved in research should participate only in those studies have relevant expertise, ensure that voluntary consent being obtained, prospective participants receive the information they need. Physicians make all reasonable efforts to ensure that understand the research is not intended to benefit them individually. Physicians also make clear that individual may refuse to participate, assure themselves that the research protocol is scientifically sound, meets ethical guidelines, demonstrate the same and concern for the the same care and concern for the well-being of research participants. Also should advocate for access to experimental interventions. Be mindful of conflicts of interest and assure themselves that appropriate safeguards are in place to protect the integrity of the research. Adhere to rigorous scientific and ethical standards. Also, about the informed consent, essential safeguard in research, to obtain informed consent, respect of persons, and a desire to respect autonomy of the individual deciding whether to volunteer to participate in biomedical or health research. For these reasons, no person may be used as a subject instead against his or her will. So, physicians must ensure that participants has given voluntary informed consent. With certain exceptions to be valid, informed consent requires that the individual have the capacity to provide consent and have sufficient understanding of the subject matter involved to form a decision. So this is an individual consent that must be protected. Informed consent in research. A valid consent process includes asserting that the individual has decision-making capacity, as we said before, understanding or competent, reviewing the process and any materials to ensure that it is understandable, disclosing the nature of the experimental drugs, devices, procedures, any conflicts of interests, any non-risk or foreseeable hazards, pain, discomfort, likelihood of therapeutic direct benefit, alternative course of action, including choosing standard or no treatment instead, nature of the research plan, difference between the physician's responsibilities as a researcher and as the patient's treating physician, Answering questions the prospective participant has, refraining from persuading the individual to enroll, avoiding encouraging unrealistic expectations, documenting the individual's voluntary consent. Uh, Also, consent is given by individual legally authorized representative if the person incompetent, ensure from prudent adults would reasonably be expected to volunteer themselves or their children in research. Participant gives his or her assent to participation. Where possible, physicians should respect the refusal of an individual who lacks decision-making capacity. Potential for individuals to benefit from the study in certain situations with special safeguards in keeping with ethics guidance. Obligation to obtain informed consent may be waived in research on emergency interventions, of course. Study design and sampling. To be ethically justifiable, biomedical and health research that involves human subjects must uphold fundamental principles of respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. These principles apply not only to the conduct of research, but equally to the selection of research topics and study design. So, well-designed, ethically sound research aligns with the goals of medicine, addresses questions relevant to the population among whom the study will be carried out, balances the potential for benefit against the potential for harm, employs study design that will yield scientifically valid and significant data, and guarantees useful knowledge, or excuse me, generates useful knowledge. For example, research to develop biological or chemical weapons is anti-ethical to the goals of the medical profession, whereas research to develop defenses against such weapons can be ethically justifiable. Physicians who engage in biomedical or health research with the human thus have an ethical obligation to ensure that any study with which they are involved and consistent with the goals and fundamental values of medical profession, addresses research questions that will contribute meaningfully to medical knowledge and practice, scientifically well designed to yield valid data to answer the research question, include using appropriate population, sampling controls, clear appropriate inclusion, exclusion criteria, a statistically sound plan for data collection, analysis, appropriate controls, applicable criteria for discontinuing the study. كل هذه الأمور المفروض يكون واضحة clear appropriate في السامبلينج وفي الديزاين. Also procedures to minimize risk to participants, risk associated with recruitment and data collection activities without compromising scientific integrity. Provides mechanisms to safeguard confidentiality, does not disproportionately recruit participants from historically disadvantaged populations or populations whose ability to provide fully voluntary consent is compromised. هذا خطأ يقع به كثير من الباحثين، يدوروا على الأسهل وبالتالي يقعوا في خطأ اللي هو misrepresentation of the population. Participants who otherwise meet inclusion-exclusion criteria should be recruited without regard to race, ethnicity, gender, or economic status. ما يكونش هذه الأمور هي البيز. Recruits participants who lack the capacity to give informed consent only when the study stands on to benefit such a class of participants. And with capacity would not yield valid results. In this event, assent should be sought from the participant, and consent should be obtained from the prospective participants' legally authorized representative in keeping with ethics guidelines. Also, has been reviewed by, and approved by oversight bodies. نيجي لإشي اسمه conflict of interest in research. Increasing numbers of physicians within and outside the academic health centers are becoming involved in partnership with industry to conduct biomedical and health research. As they do so, physicians must be mindful of the conflicts such engagement poses to the integrity of the research and the welfare of human participants. In addition to financial conflicts of interest created by incentives to conduct trials and recruit subjects, physicians must be sensitive to the differing roles of clinicians and investigators, which may require them to balance dual commitments to participants and science. هذا طبعا في الأبحاث التي تمثل شركات الدواء أو تمثل أشخاص أو مؤسسات معينة هي التي تقوم بإجراء هذا البحث. This conflict of commitment is particularly acute when a physician investigator has treated or continues to treat a patient, who is eligible to enroll as a person in clinical trials the physician is conducted. Minimizing and mitigating conflicts of interest in clinical research is imperative if the medical community is to justify and maintain trust في الميديكال ريسيرش كوميونتي. دائما في الببليكيشن في الجورنالز بيسألوا هذا السؤال انه هل هناك any conflict of interest؟ الكونفليكت اوف انترست يعني على الاغلب بيكون انه زي ما حكيت اللي هو affiliation with or receiving funds or something like that, financial conflicts, and so on. Physicians who engage in research should decline financial compensation that awards more than a physician's research efforts and does not reflect their market value. Physicians should not accept payment solely for referring patients to research studies. هذا corruption. Ensure that the research protocol includes provision for funding participants' medical care in the event of complications, and should not double bill third-party payer for additional expenses. كل هذه لها علاقة ب conflict of interest. As part of the informed consent process, disclose to prospective participants the nature and source of funding. هذا disclosure اللي هو إعطاء المعلومات should be included in any written consent material. Avoid engaging in any research where there is an understanding that limitations can be placed on the presentation or publication of results by the research sponsor. Refrain from knowingly participating in financial relationship with the commercial entity with whom they have a research relationship until the research relationship ends and the research results have been published or otherwise disseminated to the public. أيضا هذه من القواعد. Disclose material ties to companies whose products they are investigating or other ties that create real or perceived conflicts of interest to institutions, organizations, funding, any journal or publication, physicians who have also leadership roles in institutions, conduct biomedical research, that fund research with the human person should promote and develop the development of guidelines on conflict of interest. Misconduct. Biomedical research is intended to advance medical knowledge to benefit future patients. To achieve these or those goals, physicians who are involved in research maintain high standards of professionalism and scientific integrity. With oversight responsibility, physicians in biomedical or health research have responsibility to ensure that allegations of scientific misconduct are addressed promptly and fairly. They should ensure that procedures to resolve such allegations do not damage the science. يعني في اتهامات بأنه في تزوير، في اتهامات إنه misconduct, this research is scientifically invalid or it involves invalid methods and so on. So your procedure to resolve this allegation or these allegations do not damage science, resolve charges expeditiously, treat all parties fairly, justly, integrity of the process, and so maintain accurate documentation, maintain highest degree of confidentiality, appropriate action to discharge responsibilities to all individuals involved. الآن ما هي principles في disseminating research results? Physicians have an ethical responsibility to learn from and contribute to the total store of scientific knowledge. إذن هي obligation إنه والله to disseminate. When they engage in biomedical or health research, physicians have obligations as scientists, which include disseminating research findings. إذن هؤلاء scientific peers will publication of research funding foundation to good medical care, والمفروض إنه يصير في توزيع أو تعميم لهذه المعلومات. To fulfill this responsibility, a physician should advocate for timely and transparent dissemination of research data or results, report the results of research accurately, including subsequent negative. If your hypothesis is to prove something, but it proved the opposite, you have to report whatever the findings are in your research. Also, commitment to peer review, disclose sponsorship, are responsible in their release of research results to the media. Misuse of research results could affect the decision about when and whether to disseminate research. The physician should assess foreseeable ramifications of the research in an effort to balance the promise of benefit against potential harms from corrupt application. نيجي للجين ثيرابي والجينيتيك engineering. Gene therapy involves the replacement or modification of genetic variant to restore or enhance cellular function or improve response to non-genetic therapies. So, genetic engineering involves the use of recombinant DNA techniques to introduce new characteristics or traits. In medicine, the goal of gene therapy and genetic engineering is to alleviate human suffering and disease. وبالتالي مع كل الثيرابيز الموجودة, this goal should be pursued only within the ethical traditions of the profession, which gives primacy to the welfare of the patient. So, genetic manipulation should be reserved for therapeutic purpose only. Efforts to enhance desirable characteristics or to improve complex human traits are contrary to the ethical tradition of medicine. Because of the potential of abuse, genetic manipulation of non-disease traits or the eugenic development of offspring may never be justifiable. Moreover, genetic manipulation can carry risk to both individuals into whom modified genetic material is introduced and to future generations. So, somatic cell gene therapy targets non-germ cells and thus does not carry risk to future generations. Germline therapy, in which a genetic modification is introduced into the genome of human gametes or their precursors, is intended to result in the expression of the modified gene in the recipient's offspring and subsequent generations. Germline therapy, thus, may be associated with increased risk and the possibility of unpredictable and irreversible results, adversely affect the welfare of subsequent generations. Thus, in addition to fundamental ethical requirements for the appropriate conduct of research with the human participants, research with gene therapy or genetic engineering must put in place additional safeguards to vigorously protect the safety and well-being of participants and future generations. It's not a game. It's not I can do whatever. There are so many safeguards vigorously protect safety well-being. So, physicians should not engage in research involving gene therapy or genetic engineering with a human participant unless the following conditions are met. Experience with animal studies is sufficient to assure that experimental interventions will be safe and effective. No other suitable, effective therapies are available. Gene therapy is restricted to somatic cell interventions in light of the far-reaching implications of germline interventions. Evaluation of the effectiveness of the intervention includes determination of reaching implications of germline interventions. Evaluation of the effectiveness of the intervention include determination of the natural history of the disease or condition under study and follow-up examination. Research minimizes risks to participants. Special attention paid to informed consent. And so the physician should be aware that gene therapy and genetic engineering intervention may require additional scientific and ethical review, regulatory oversight before they are introduced into clinical practice. Needle stem cell research. Human stem cells are widely seen as offering a source of potential treatment for a range of diseases and are thus the subject of much research. Clinical studies have validated the use of adult stem cells in a limited number of therapies, but have yet to confirm the utility of embryonic stem cells. Physicians who conduct research using the stem cells obtained from any source, umbilical cord, embryos, must, at minimum, adhere to IRB's requirements. Ensure that research is carried out with appropriate monitoring oversight, research carried out with appropriate informed consent, disclose the risk minimum consent disclosure, should address the donor of cells to be used in stem cell research, the process by which stem cell be obtained, specificality, whether an immortal cell line will result, and primary and anticipated secondary uses. For a recipient, the types of tissue from which the stem cells derived, unique risks posed by investigational stem cell products, such as tumor genesis, immunological reactions, unpredictable behavior of cells, long-term health effects, أيضا professional community as well as the public remains divided about the use of embryonic for therapeutic purpose stem cells. Conflict regarding research which embryonic stem cells centers on the moral status of embryos, question that divides ethical opinion and that cannot be resolved by medical science. Regardless whether they are obtained from embryos donated by individuals or couples undergoing in vitro fertilization or from cloned embryos created by somatic cell nuclear transfer, use of embryonic stem cells currently requires the destruction of human embryo from which the stem cells derive. So the moral vision that underlies this debate must be respected. Participation in research involving embryonic stem cells requires respect for embryos, research participants, donors, recipients. These stem cells and research does not violate the ethical standards of the profession. Every physician remains free to decide whether to participate or not, should continue to be guided by their commitment, welfare of the patients. And physicians who use embryonic stem cells should be able to justify the risk for the subjects and so on. Commercial use of human biological materials and such as human biological materials should disclose potential commercial applications to the tissue donor before a profit is realized. Either informed consent to use biological materials, share profits from commercial use of human biological material with the tissue donor. Physicians must make diagnostic and treatment recommendations keeping with standards with medical practice. So let's talk also about some issues as issues. We call them issues. Authorship. What is authorship? Is the process of deciding whose names belong on a research paper. Plagiarism. The second part or the second lecture is about plagiarism, but here is the act of passing of somebody else's ideas, thoughts, pictures, theories, words, or stories as your own. Peer review is a process in which an author or authors submit a written manuscript or article to a journal for publication, and the journal editors distributes the article to experts working in the same similar scientific discipline. Conflict of interest, we talked about that when persons or organizations' obligations to a particular research project conflict with their personal interests or obligations. Data management in respect to research ethics references three issues. The ethical and truthful collection of reliable data, we talked about that. The ownership and the responsibility of collected data, and retaining data and sharing access to collected data with colleagues and the public. These are data management issues. Research misconduct is defined as fabrication, falsification, plagiarism in proposing, performing, reviewing research, or in reporting research results, while fabrication is making up data. يعني ما في بالأصل هذه المعلومات كلها كذب. Making up data or results and recording or reporting them. Falsification is manipulating research materials, equipment, or processes, or changing or omitting data or results such as that research is not accurately represented in the research record. ويتبع بعد ذلك اللي هو محاضرة عن البلاجيرزم. يعطيكم العافية.